JPRO Network is for everyone who works in a Jewish organization. And I want to welcome our colleagues who are Jewish and our colleagues from all faiths and no faith. Thank you for joining together. Here's how we'll spend our time. Josh Donner will open the session in a moment. Then Dr. Erica Brown will teach. Following her teaching, we'll have half an hour for conversations in small groups because we believe that the most important thing that we can do for one another right now is to share and listen. When we come back from our small groups, Rabbi Scott Aaron will offer closing remarks. Finally, I want you to know that even though our agenda formally ends on the hour, I'll be keeping the Zoom line open longer just in case anyone would like to continue our conversation. Josh Donner is going to formally open our time now. Josh, I am personally grateful to you for being on the other end of my phone line on Saturday night and throughout the day on Sunday. The support that you offered is a model for what we hope everyone joining us will experience during this hour.
Thanks, Alana. I am personally grateful to you and for the tremendous outpouring of support from professional colleagues around the country, in Israel, and around the world. This is all raw and fresh, but I certainly know that my own personal sense of what it means to be a part of the Jewish people and a part of that special corner of the Jewish people as Jewish professionals will always be defined by how the last few days have been and the coming weeks will be. I can't speak for all of my colleagues. Everyone is experiencing things differently, but I can say that the phone calls, emails, and text messages that we've been receiving help, and that your thoughts and prayers really do matter. I also want to take this moment that I've been given to say that all of you matter. You are all acting as a source of strength for your colleagues and constituencies. And I hope that while you are focusing on taking care of others, you are also taking the time to take care of yourself. Today's call is a great way to start that process. And we'll all be working on finding ways as we go forward to do it some more. So thank you to everyone at JPRO for organizing, and particularly Rabbi Scott Aaron and Dr. Erica Brown for so quickly offering to help organize and facilitate this call. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Erica Brown to lead us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I want to thank all the folks at JPRO for, I think, the tremendous effort to understand that we are on the front lines of this work, and sometimes we feel vulnerable being on the front lines of this work, precisely because of what happened at Pittsburgh. I start the teaching today by saying that I was actually born in Pittsburgh, and so when I look on my forms and I look on my passport and I think about my own origins, they were in Squirrel Hill. What I wanted to look at, just as a framing for the conversations that will follow, are a few verses from the Hebrew book of Echa, of Lamentations, observations that were made by the prophet Jeremiah when he looked at Jerusalem in ruins, when he looked at a city and we looked at the temple, which was, if you like, the master synagogue, and he looked at these in ruins. And the observations as a firsthand witness he made specifically relate in part to tears. So I want to read these verses with you. I want to think about what the author of these verses was trying to communicate about his emotional landscape. My eyes are spent with tears, my heart is in tumult, my being melts away over the ruin of my poor people. When I cry and plead, he shuts out my prayer. My eyes shed streams of water over the ruin of my poor people. My eyes shall flow without cease, without respite, until the Lord looks down and beholds from heaven. So I think that the author is managing two separate tensions. One is the sense of being absolutely overwhelmed, almost crippled and paralyzed by the density of emotion, by the fate of one's people, and unable to really move, unable to really uplift himself out of that state. And the other tension is feeling that when we cry, there may not be anyone listening. Is God or is someone else shutting out the prayer, shutting out the tears? Because what's the worst response to someone's tears is when we ignore them, when we say nothing, when they have no meaning. So with these two types of tears in mind from Lamentations, I'd like to share with you an excerpt and a synopsis of what I think is a most magnificent sermon that Rabbi Norman Lamb, the former chancellor of Yeshiva University, gave one Rosh Hashanah called Three Who Cried. And although he gave this in 1962, in certain ways it speaks to the kind of tears that we shed on Shabbat, that we shed on Sunday, that we've shed every day of this week. He talks about three types of tears. The types of tears that come when our myths of absolute security and certainty are shattered. He talks about the tears of frustration of those who resign themselves to hopelessness. And he talks about the tears of justice that lead to a determination to change reality. And when you think about what happened in Pittsburgh, when we think about the pain of that the community's in, when we see pictures of funeral after funeral, the first set of tears comes to mind. For many people, that this happened in America, that this happens in a house of worship, that this happens somewhere where people have been going week after week for millennia, shattered some myths of absolute security. I had to explain to my own daughter, a shul goer, not to be afraid. And yet, even as I said, don't be afraid, I knew that I was masking some of my own vulnerability and my own fear. So certain myths have been shattered for many people about the nature of what it means to be in a house of worship. And then there's the tears of frustration of those of us who resign ourselves to hopelessness because unfortunately this kind of hate crime has happened in this country again and again and again. So although it's a surprise because it has to be shocking, it's never fully a surprise because we've inured ourselves to some of the pain of what this of these events because they happen in synagogues, in churches, in concert halls, in movie cinemas, on the street and in schools and on college campuses. What Norman Lamb stresses, and with this I want to close, is that Jewish tears always lead to justice. They lead to a determination to change reality. And we, who are on the front lines of that reality as Jewish communal professionals, are here to help make sure that people inside them feel safe, that we feel safe, that our vulnerabilities are respected and honored, and that we have time to nourish and self-care as we prepare ourselves to support our community in all the ways that they need supporting, and that we provide consolation and solace for each other in all of the ways that we need support.
Erica, thank you very much. We're going to go now into breakout rooms for discussion based on the guide that you now see on your screen. Okay, we'll see you back in half an hour. I want to welcome you back. I know that there was a mix of experiences in the room. Some worked well, and I apologize for any technical or other difficulties that you had. And I hope that to the extent possible, you managed to have meaningful conversations. I'm now going to turn it over to Rabbi Scott Aaron to offer us some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Ilana.
There you go.
The wonders of modern technology. Thank you. Hi, Chevra. It's not an easy time for any of us, as we know, and we're in this time within Jewish context that I think is worth noting. It's called Aninut. It's the period between a death and a burial for the mourner. It's the time that Pittsburgh is in right now, if we put ourselves in their place. They've been conducting funerals all week and will continue through tomorrow. And they can't fully move into Shiva as a community and into beyond that to Shloshim because of this this period where we as Jews put all of our concern and our effort on the ones who are in need of our most attention, those who are deceased, who we need to give the most honor and attention to, and then we can focus on ourselves. And it's a tough thing. You can't even say Kaddish at this time for someone that you isn't buried yet. And we, in a sense, are feeling as a community that in between discomfort. We know that we have to be strong for our colleagues in Pittsburgh. We know that we need to be strong for our own people, but we also know we need to do our own grieving. We need to say our own Kaddish. We need to find a way to move forward. And as colleagues, that takes some time. I want to quote Josh Donner, who on a private conversation said something I thought very profound, which is that right now the community is, and we are all engaged right now getting to this Shabbat and getting through this week. But for many of us as communal professionals and as rabbis and as clergy, not just in Pittsburgh, but all over, we are going to probably feel it harder next week when the attention's off, when the energy's down, and we're not as busy, and we're not as helping, we're not as serving the community, and it's going to need to process our own. So I think that's a normal feeling we're encountering, and the idea of self-care, the idea of taking time out to talk now, to engage in almost our own little small Shiva call with each other, I think is a very healthy and important thing to do. I want to close this out today, just before Ilana closes out, I should say, by reading a prayer I found on Ritual Well, which to me was incredible in the way it was written so quickly after the events. It was by a gentleman named Devon Spire. It's called Prayer for the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I think it's worth remembering, by the way, that Tree of Life, actually, it was 3 congregations. There was the New Light congregation, which was mostly seniors, a small congregation that was aging gracefully, and Dor Hadash congregation, which had a Reconstructionist minyan that had just celebrated its 50th anniversary. So it was a vibrant, rich, and diverse building at that time. So the prayer for Tree of Life Synagogue that I think we can all feel for. Sure as we lay tefillin on bruised bodies and walk cautiously down the halls of seminaries, and sure as we collectively hold our breaths as we drop off frightened children to learn in lockdown synagogues, religious schools, and camps, in the months to come after this horrible day, we will remember our lightness unto nations, unto God. Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the soul of a person is the light of God. By living, breathing, and being Jewish in the world, we are filling light's absence with our abundance. And though we may feel inclined to lament our lack of safety, to be twisted to a state of hopelessness because of the real, ongoing, and immobilizing cycle of anti-Semitic violence, we must remember that as we pray, yearn, gather, vote, fight for ourselves and for the specific struggles of others who are the stranger, all this is Jews. We are providing the very antidote to an indifferent person's idolatry. In sensing and rising to meet the needs of the particular, we will transform the apathetic discourse of all into actions of a powerful moving us. Our grief is not the end. Our tears will be our seeds, and our Jewishness will plant a world in which each of us, in all our identities and vulnerabilities, refugees, immigrants, poor people, queer people, people of color, Jews, Muslims, are seen as necessary branches on the growing tree of life. Universalistic and rote prayers will not get us there, but the angels that will rescue the righteous as from the depths of Sodom, they exist to be awakened within each of us. So open your eyes, and despite the brokenness, my people, act to lift up, to answer the calls of others and our own, and always, always, always to rise. We can, and we will, and we say Amen. And before we close, we just as to take a moment to remember again those we lost: Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. May all their memories be for a blessing.
Thank you, Josh, Erica, and Scott, for your words and your teaching, for giving us the frame from which to connect with one another and more deeply with ourselves. At JPRO, we're constantly thinking about how we can build a broad professional community across geography. And so if you have any thoughts about what worked well today or what we could have done better, or if you just want to be in touch, please email me at ilana@jpro.org. And we're also going to send out my email address in the chat. So hopefully it'll be easier for you to reach me. I want to remind you that the Zoom line is going to stay open. I'll be keeping it open for anyone who wants to continue to talk or who wants to talk to me. And I wanted to close with a very brief personal reflection. On Monday night, I arrived at the vigil in Toronto, which is where I live, just a couple of minutes late. And so I was at the very, very back of a huge crowd of people. And a few minutes into the vigil, I turned around and I was totally stunned to see a sea of people behind me and surrounding me. And I had this very visceral, physical experience of having gone from the feeling, like the actual feeling of having no one at my back, to having hundreds of people at my back. It was so comforting. I felt like I was in a cocoon, and there was an elderly woman next to me holding onto her cane, and I thought of my bubbies and zadies who were immigrants and Holocaust survivors. And the experience over the last few days has been the same. As your RSVPs for this program poured in, I was reminded that we are a strong community of colleagues, and we have one another's backs. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so
Shabbat
much.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.